The college football national championship happens tonight as we're recording this, and there's no better way to celebrate than doing a mock draft reaction. Today, we're going to do a one-round Superflex mock draft based on the mock draft insights of Dane Brugler of The Athletic. He posted a two-round mock draft for us to break down, go through, talk about the landing spots, the draft capital, and the best way for us to do that, of course, is to draft this mock draft as if it is the real NFL draft and give you guys how we would handle a rookie draft with these landing spots. Of course, we do these all the time. They're a lot of fun. Give us a chance to talk about prospect fits and the prospects themselves. But yeah, should be a fun exercise. Danny's going to be picking from the 101, then I'll go 102, and then we'll kind of go back and forth on this one.
Yeah, like you said, the end of the college season is tonight. I'm just going to be – this is kind of like the hater bowl for me, where as a Michigan fan, I don't want either of these teams to win, but Notre Dame is the lesser of two evils. So we will be cheering for the Irish tonight. But all jokes aside, like you kind of mentioned, we're going through the mock draft season. Obviously, we're going to see with the NFL playoffs kind of coming to an end within these next couple of weeks. A lot of these big-name analysts, guys like Dane Brugler, guys like Matt Miller are going to be starting to drop some mocks. So we'll be going through the Dane Brugler mock today. And yeah, I mean, the NFL playoffs, final four teams left. It's going to be exciting. We'll have the finalized order sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Danny, I'll get you kicked off at 101. On the screen right now, you guys should be able to see the full mock draft. We'll have it linked down below in the description if you want to see like the non-fantasy relevant players, but we've obviously gone through, cherry picked only the fantasy relevant guys. There's a couple big name guys that didn't get their name called in the first two rounds, Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State being one of them. But we're going to go through and kind of with the landing spots that we have here, do a 12-pick first round Superflex mock draft with Danny kicking off at the 101. We probably know which player he's going to, but we'll talk about the fit here in a second.
Yeah, so this is actually an interesting fit for said player because typically in these mock drafts, we see this guy go inside the top 12, the top 10 overall picks. But Dane actually had this guy falling to the 20th overall pick. And I will be selecting Ashton Jeanty, running back of the Boise State Broncos, getting drafted at 20th overall to the Denver Broncos. So gets to keep the same allegiance, obviously cheering on the Broncos, same type of color scheme, obviously there with the blue and orange. But I mean, this is a glove of a fit. We both had him comp to Alvin Kamara. Guess which coach he's going to? The guy that literally coached Alvin Kamara to an RB1, top 3 overall running back in fantasy. We know the size. We know the tackle breaking ability. We know the elusiveness, the home run speed that he actually brings to the table. We saw it on display this year against big time competition as well. And people might look at the Penn State game like, oh, he only averaged like 3.5 yards per carry. 80% of his rushing yards in that game were created after contact, meaning that the Boise State offensive line was just absolutely overwhelmed by the Penn State front. But Jeanty's a different cat, and he could break tackles. And even though it only looks like, oh, he's changing a negative 3-yard gain into a 3-yard gain, it doesn't really look great on the box score. Film watchers know exactly what they saw from that game.
Yeah, 16 missed tackles forced on 30 attempts. And like you said, 99 total rushing yards. He had 81 of them after contact. And the only reason people are now gravitating, oh, look what he did against Penn State, is because he went to a smaller school, but earlier in the season against what was the number 1 team in the country entering the college football playoff. He goes 25 for 192 and 3 touchdowns against Oregon, adds 2 catches for 24 yards through the air. This guy's the full package. I mean, you guys know this already about Ashton Jeanty. If you tanked the 2025 season, you were probably hoping that you would get Jeanty with the 101. Going to the Denver Broncos is the absolute best schematic fit he can go to in the entire draft. It's better than the Cowboys, in my opinion, as well. If people are thinking the Cowboys, nutted landing spot, that's the best place he could go to. The Broncos is better. Obviously, Cowboys would be higher draft capital, so that would factor in a little bit. But man, Denver has Sean Payton. Sean Payton coached Alvin Kamara, who has finished as an RB1 8 times in his career. And Alvin Kamara and Jeanty are exactly the same archetype. You want to feed these guys as receivers. You want to get them in space, use that contact balance that they have. And as me and you both detailed, we're working on our draft guide, which will be coming out mid-February, that first edition. Jeanty has breakaway speed, unlike Alvin Kamara. He has the type of burners that Kamara doesn't really have. So he's absolutely fantastic prospect, and he would be a great option at 101 to the Denver Broncos with the 20th pick.
Yeah, and the final note I will have on Jeanty before we go down to the 102 here, like you said, with the fit with the Broncos. Obviously, we know the schematic advantage, working with Sean Payton, like we saw, really develop Alvin Kamara. Because again, Alvin Kamara wasn't Alvin Kamara right away. Alvin Kamara was a 3rd-round NFL draft pick, got, slight usage in his first year, but we saw the flashes, and then by the year 2 is really when he exploded onto the scene. With Ashton Jeanty, when we're talking about this landing spot with the schematic, along with the personnel, because we're looking at this Broncos situation. very strong offensive line this year, and a quarterback that outside of Cortland Sutton doesn't have many weapons to facilitate the ball to in the passing game. And Ashton Genty would be right off the bat the number 2 established receiver in that backfield, or on that team. Sorry.
Yeah, and we know that Sean Payton, it's been driving him nuts that he can't find an efficient running back to save his life. He might just be like, screw it, I'm taking this, prospect who's basically just Alvin Kamara as a prospect, except with a 400 touch season under his belt, because that was the big knock coming on Alvin Kamara coming out of Alabama and Tennessee, is that he never really carried a full workload, and he actually has breakaway athleticism that Kamara didn't really show at the NFL Scouting Combine. So an easy pick there for Danny at 101. I'm in a little bit more of a bind here because, we got Cam Ward going 101 to the Tennessee Titans in a super flex draft like we're doing here. That's going to carry a lot of weight because Cam Ward can move around a little bit. Tennessee's got a pretty decent cast of pieces there. They drafted a lot of offensive linemen over the last few years. They had an improvement on that front this season. You do have Calvin Ridley there. You have a couple of other weapons in the run game as well. But I am going to roll with Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver from Arizona. He goes 104 to the New England Patriots, which you and I have long talked about as the nutted landing spot for him, because we are both very big Drake May fans. And Drake May was throwing to, you, me, and Mr. Magoo out there this season. And Tet McMillan is simply just built different. We look at this guy. We're going to be breaking him down very soon. Neither of us have actually formally graded him at this point in time, but he looks very similar to a young Drake London. You have the young sophomore breakout production alongside Jacob Cowing. Absolutely alphas. What we thought was going to be a very, decent day 2 caliber receiver caused him to lose some draft stock there. And a guy that was like a 5th-year senior at the time. Jacob Cowing was a very experienced player, and you got this 19-year-old kid coming in basically alphaing him. And then he builds upon that this season with another great performance. So Drake May, you got your number 1 receiver. Welcome home, Tet McMillan.
Yeah, and it's funny because people are going to see the size. People are going to think right off the bat, oh, he's 6'5". He's probably a slug. He's probably just a contested catch merchant. It's like, now you're seeing fucking clips of this guy literally catching the ball with one hand, putting it between his legs. Like, the guy is a freak athlete on top of just being a dynamic big weapon at that X wide receiver position. We've seen him operate in yak scenarios. And like you said, my comp for him going into this prospect cycle was Drake London. Again, we will be watching more 2024 film. We'll have those exact grades followed out. But going into the year, obviously, with our summer scouting, he's a guy, like I said, compared to Drake London, clear top 2 wide receiver in the class at that time. I'm sure we'll talk about the other guy going into the season in just a couple of picks. But I think Tet McMillan with this year, the level of production, the level of step that he's taken has to be considered the 101 at the wide receiver position and the 102 in this mock draft.
Yeah, he does have the contested catch ability that you'd want to see from a 6'5", 212-pound receiver. 60% contested catches, 18 of 30 this year, 2.87 yards per route run, which was built upon from his sophomore season when he had 2.79. Receiving grade, 89.1 as a sophomore. Took a little bit of a downtick there at 85.8, but 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was one of the few bright spots, really, of a wide receiver college football landscape that actually didn't produce that many great draft-eligible dudes. And we'll talk about a couple more of them in this mock, but the wide receiver class generally is a little bit down relative to what we've seen the last couple of years, but Tet McMillan represents one of the top end guys in this class. So I'll kick it over to you here with the 103. Are you going to take the top quarterback? Are you going to go back to the running back position? Maybe take a big homer pick because wide receiver 2 in this class went to your favorite team?
So I considered going the Burden route. However, I do really like the landing spot, and I do like what this guy represents to this spot. You would be thinking I would be referencing Cam Ward going 101 to the Titans, but I actually do prefer in this circumstance Shedeur Sanders going to the Raiders, 106 overall. We do also see later in the draft, spoiler alert, he is going to be paired with Omarion Hampton on that team at 237. We know Brock Bowers is in town. We know Jacoby Myers is in town. We should have a big-time upgrade at the head coaching position. Maybe a Ben Johnson is able to be the head coach for the Raiders. That's a lot of the buzz that we're hearing right now. And Shedeur Sanders, again, he's going to catch flack because does he have an A-plus level arm? No. Is he a Jaden Daniels level improviser? No. Does he accept a little bit too much pressure at times when he's in the pocket? It really flushes him. Sure. But at the same time, he is the archetype of quarterback where maybe he doesn't have the overall ceiling to be the dynasty startup 104 in some circumstances. Sure. But at the same time, I think he's going to be a rock solid NFL quarterback. I think he's going to be, a classic top 10 to 15 quarterback in the league for a while. Think you're Brock Purdy, think you're JJ McCarthy in terms of what we were talking about him last year. That's kind of the limelight I view a guy like Shedeur Sanders. And if you're telling me you can get a potential high-end quarterback to low-end quarterback one in dynasty startups, I think 103 is the spot that I'd be able to take that. On top of that, like I said, very underrated weapon score if this were to happen, on top of having a big-time upgraded head coach. Brock Bowers already shown to be arguably the best tight end in the NFL as a rookie. Jacoby Myers, yeah, sure. Is he a classic wide receiver one on a team? Probably not. When we have Bowers being that number one overall target, I think Jacoby Myers is a really strong two. We saw in circumstances this year, the Raiders passing offense, yes, it was inconsistent because of quarterback play, but there were times because of Brock Bowers' yak ability, because of Jacoby Myers' route running ability, we did see some flashes from this passing offense. You plug in a sturdy starter there with Shedeur Sanders, you let him take that next step of development with a new coach. I do think 103 is the spot where I need to be taking him.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I mean, if his biggest problem is inviting too much pressure and maybe holding the ball too long and that kind of thing, like the Raiders actually have a pretty good pass protecting offensive line. And we've seen, flashes of like Aiden O'Connell playing like a pretty high-end quarterback because that line can play at a high level. So yeah, I personally, again, we haven't officially graded these quarterbacks yet, but based on what I saw from the summer scouting period, I thought Shedeur Sanders was like a rock solid quarterback prospect who even potentially had a chance to turn into like a CJ Stroud level quarterback in the NFL. I think that's his absolute ceiling. I don't think he's quite there yet. It would probably take a little bit of work from him on his end of things, but at the very least, you can pencil him in as a very solid, can run the Ben Johnson scheme. If that's what his quarterback or his coach is going to end up being, and you need him to play like Jared Goff, I think he can play like Jared Goff. Like, I think he can absolutely do something like that. And if you get a 23-year-old quarterback playing like Jared Goff, he's going to rise up dynasty rankings very, very quickly. So
Stroud was the 103 going into this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm looking at the board. Do I want to go with the first overall pick, Cam Ward, Tennessee Titans? Again, this is probably what's going to end up happening. I mean, he is the betting favorite right now to go 101, but at the same time, the Tennessee Titans are like, maybe they could trade down, maybe they could take a different position. Their whole, they have this whole host of other issues. A lot of people also don't know what to think of these top end quarterback prospects in this class. Are they actually worth the first overall pick? And in this case, I think the Tennessee Titans, if this actually happens, we're going to probably see the public face of, okay, these guys are not worth the first overall pick to after the draft process is over, after the combine is over. We're hearing a lot of redeeming reports. We're hearing a lot of redeeming qualities about Cam Ward from like an above the shoulder standpoint. My biggest problem with him from what I've seen of him is that he kind of like makes too many mistakes and plays a lot of hero ball. And that's something that really scares me as a quarterback prospects wise, because it usually doesn't get easier in the NFL to not do that. So that would be my main concern.
That was the biggest weakness that the current Titans quarterback has with Will Levis. So
and I think by the end of it, like, who knows? Maybe Cam Ward is the same caliber of prospect as Will Levis. We all thought Will Levis was going to go in the first round, but because of those issues that he had at Kentucky, not a lot of people really thought he was worth that first round pick. And that's why he ended up sliding to the second round. So again, we're still operating this like enigma kind of quarterback class. So I am going to go with Cam Ward here with this selection because
I think that's the process
value,
play.
It trumps all, right? Like if you think about this year, we had 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. All of them have gained value, except for JJ McCarthy, who's kind of maintained his value, but that's because he didn't play all season. Like Drake May, I'd
argue real quick too with JJ McCarthy, he might have even increased in value because of people seeing what Sam Darnold did in that offense.
Yeah, but like you look at Michael Penix, we all thought it was going to take him 3 years to start. He's poised to start as a second-year quarterback. He goes up in value, and we're like not even super high on Michael Penix, but we can even recognize that he was a great process pick at the 203, 204, where you had to draft him. Bo Nix, look what's happened to his value since he ended up, falling to a lot of people at the 111 to 201, 202 type of area. So quarterbacks go high in startup drafts. Quarterbacks go high in super flex leagues. That is why I'm going to be selecting 104 Cam Ward, who, again, in the Tennessee Titans scheme, you got some young offensive pieces to build around. They still got to add some pieces. We still don't really know what to expect from the coaching staff. I personally think if I was the Titans, I wouldn't select the quarterback because I don't think this is like a great draft class for them anyways. And you're probably a couple pieces away. Don't know if you have the right guy at head coach. If you want the nest or the infrastructure to be better for a quarterback coming in, then like what happens if Cam Ward has a struggling first year, they fire Brian Callahan, and then they got to overhaul the entire offense for his second year? That's just not an ideal situation for a quarterback to be in. It's kind of what we saw from Bryce Young, what we've seen from, Trevor Lawrence, what we saw from like Zach Wilson. Like, you don't love when your quarterback has not a stable infrastructure. So I'm going to take Cam Ward here with the 104, but I will say, like, depending on other factors, I could have definitely gone with Luther Burden. I could have definitely gone with Amarian Hampton. I could have definitely gone with, whoever else.
Yeah, and just adding to that, obviously, again, we're going to be drafting it based on how the mock kind of appears. And obviously, we do see Cam Ward goes 101. We will be taking him here, of course, at the 104. Like you said, you made that selection. Just from a real life standpoint, like, wouldn't it almost make more sense for the Titans, because they have $51 million in cap space, I believe, to just sign like a Sam Darnold and draft Travis Hunter? I almost would rather that circumstance if I'm a Titans fan. Obviously, we're not playing in that world given this mock draft, but just think in real life, like, how would you evaluate that?
Yeah, I mean, even Darnold will cost you enough to the point that I would almost rather just go like the route that Minnesota did this year when they signed Sam Darnold, or the route that Tampa Bay went 2 years ago, where you just sign a quarterback with upside as a bridge, like Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold or whatever. And maybe that guy is Justin Fields. Maybe that guy is Zach Wilson. Maybe that guy, like, maybe you grab Kirk Cousins after he gets cut by the Falcons or whatever, and then you draft a second or a third round quarterback or something. I would rather do that personally. Spend the first overall pick and the best player in the draft. Don't reach for a quarterback. But anyways, we're not talking about a mock draft here I guess we are talking about a mock draft, but we aren't talking about what we would do in the NFL draft here. Cam Ward goes 101. He's going to find his way in the top 4 or 5 picks to start of rookie drafts this year.
100%. Just wanted to play that fun little hypothetical. We'll move straight to the 105, and my pick was made easier. We see the 2 quarterbacks go off the board. We see the RB1 and the wide receiver 1 go off the board. I'll be selecting the wide receiver 2 in the class, Luther Burden, going to my Dallas Cowboys here at the 112. Pretty simple. The Cowboys have needed a second weapon after CeeDee Lamb for quite a while. Again, we saw that kind of masked in the 2023 season. Dak had that MVP run. CeeDee Lamb, 1,800-yard wide receiver. But we did see specifically, even at the beginning of the year when Dak was healthy, and of course at the end of the year once Dak missed that time with Cooper Rush, the Cowboys just didn't really have juice on offense after CeeDee Lamb. You plug in a guy like Luther Burden, again, a guy that coming into the year I thought could potentially take a Jamar Chase level step. Doesn't really seem to be the case. Seems like he kind of plateaued from a production standpoint this year. However, I mean, the tools are still absolutely there. At worst, even if he's playing a Deebo Samuel plus role, maybe he's the Jordan Addison to CeeDee Lamb's Justin Jefferson. Regardless, though, you're getting a potential 1,000 to 1,200 yard type of guy for an offense with Dallas that, as long as Dak Prescott is healthy, we can pretty much peg for a top 5 to 10 unit in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think Addison's actually like a half decent comp for, I mean, Burden doesn't really play like how Addison played, because Addison's more of like your field stretcher, can win on deep routes, gives you a little bit of upside to win in the short to intermediate game. Whereas Burden is more your like vertical slot who can also, make things happen after the catch. But in terms of like a usage standpoint, I mean, Burden and Addison's sophomore seasons don't all look all that different. Like when Addison was a sophomore at Pitt, he had like a 70% slot rate, and he had like 1,600 yards and like 17 touchdowns or whatever it was. Whereas with Burden, you got 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, 3.29 yards per run as a sophomore, played 81% of his snaps from the slot there. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to a situation where you are not required to be the number 1 wide receiver, that is super advantageous for any rookie, but let alone a guy that actually does have the upside to be a number 1 wide receiver if he can develop at the next level. Again, the Missouri quarterback play was not good this year. The offensive scheme was not nearly as efficient as it was. You got Burden going from a 91 PFF receiving grade, which was a top 5 mark in the country as a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old sophomore, to an 80.2 receiving grade. So maybe he was dealing with injury too. Like, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes from that perspective in college football, but I feel very confident that this is one of the better landing spots that he could get for sure.
100%, because obviously we talked about from a usage standpoint, you got the pressure off of you with having a bona fide top 5 wide receiver in the NFL with CeeDee Lamb on the other side. I mean, when CeeDee Lamb's healthy, he's going to command 10 targets per game. He's going to be that 1,800-yard wide receiver for you. But even if CeeDee Lamb's doing his own thing, Jake Ferguson didn't really take the step that I thought he could have this year. Again, maybe he was dealing with injury, who knows, but definitely a down year on his own end. And after that, I mean, Jalen Tolbert's more of a wide receiver 3-4 on this team. You don't have a running back, at least. Well, we'll talk about Trevion Henderson in a bit, but it's not like he's going to go out there and command 80, 90 plus targets. And we know Dak Prescott, when he's healthy, is going to be a 4,500 plus yard passer, 30 to 35 plus passing touchdowns. So as long as Luther Burden can just show that dynamic ability, use his yak ability in this offense, see what the Cowboys end up doing at the head coaching position. But regardless, getting a talented player here at 12 to take pressure off of CeeDee Lamb, both from a Luther Burden fantasy fit as well as a Cowboys real life fit, I think would be an A+ type of move.
Yeah, so we got 5 players off the board so far. So I'm on the board with the 106, looking at potentially, these are the names that I'm kind of caught between here. Travis Hunter, the enigma of all enigmas in rookie drafts this year. We have no idea how much he's going to play on offense. You've heard the spiel already from us. Of course, he is talented enough to be going even potentially higher than this. But if he's going to play defense most of the time, we're going to wait till later in this draft to kind of talk about him. I have Igmika Egbuka on the board going to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the 21st overall pick. I have Amari Hampton, who went 37th overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. We have Travion Henderson also going to the Dallas Cowboys, but in the second round with the 44th overall pick. And then a couple other guys that would be later in consideration. You got Caleb Johnson going to the Vikings as well, which is a very interesting fit, especially with 24th overall draft capital. I think what I'm going to do, and Danny has officially graded Caleb Johnson. I have not yet. I have not gotten to him yet. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take Amari Hampton because Amari Hampton gets 37th overall draft capital. There is no real marketable difference between 24th overall pick and 37th overall pick in terms of prospect hit rates at the running back position. So in both cases, you're getting a guy who should be the feature back for his team as soon as his rookie season, especially when you factor in the backfield competition that they have in Las Vegas right now. You got Zamir White, Alexander Madison, Dylan Laube, Amir Abdullah. Like, Amari Hampton is the lead back from day one of training camp in that backfield. And in this scenario, they also drafted Shadur Sanders to play the quarterback position. They have a pretty good offensive line. They have Brock Bowers. They have Jacoby Myers. Maybe they add more receiver talent or whatever. So with Hampton, you got a 6-foot, 220-pound running back who, when I watched him, the only real issues I had with him was that he's not the most refined runner of the football. He doesn't really know how to tempo his runs quite yet. He's kind of running at a one-track, 10-speed bike all the time. But if he can learn that at the next level, you don't see 6-foot, 220-pound backs who have the explosive burst that he has, who have the receiving profile that he has as well. And he lost Drake May at quarterback this year and managed to somehow improve his numbers, which is really, really impressive because normally we would see, okay, I was fully prepared this year. If you told me a year ago, flashback to a year ago, how would we be talking about Amari Hampton's junior season? I would have been like, well, he lost Drake May. It wasn't nearly as productive as his sophomore year. That's what I expected to be saying about Amari Hampton, but that's not what we're saying. He improved upon his numbers, which is super impressive, especially as a receiver. He got just massive amounts of usage, over 40 targets this season. So Hampton going to the Raiders, he's probably going to be a lead back right from jump and probably a top 12 dynasty running back immediately when he gets drafted here.
100%. Again, this is a guy that I like slightly more than you, but at the same time, we both understand that if a team wanted to take him at the back end of the first round, given the traits that he had, be totally comfortable with that. It's almost funny with Amari Hampton. He lands with the Raiders here. What the pro Zamir White guys in fantasy were saying last year, you know, the size, the speed, the between the tackles ability, like this picture that they had of Zamir White in their head of what he could be in fantasy going into 2024 is basically just exactly what Amari Hampton is. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the contact balance between the tackles. Again, you'd like to see him win a little bit more with ball carrier moves, making people miss in space a little bit more often. I was a little bit higher on him than you in terms of the vision and patience portion of his prospect profile. I thought, especially behind the line of scrimmage, diagnosing the open gaps, getting his foot in the ground, exploding upfield is really where he thrived. I know what you mean, though. Once he was in open space, it didn't really feel like he, for example, a guy like Travion Henderson, the understanding, the diagnosis of the space that he has to work with. You didn't really see that from Amari Hampton because he didn't really have the type of creativity that some of the other backs in this class have. However, if you're just looking for a no-nonsense between the tackles runner that can create big plays given that natural explosive ability, Amari Hampton's your guy, which is why he's my RB2.
Yeah, he's the definition of when people say the scouting term, oh, he's a north and south runner. Like he's the definition of that. You find a hole, you hit it, you explode through it, you have speed, you have size, and you hurt somebody at the end of the run. That's exactly what Amari Hampton does on every single play.
He's a Raider.
And he's a Raider, exactly. Yeah. And it would be nice if you could see him do that for the most part, and then also kind of tempo and, you know, change his run speeds when he can. That's the thing that I had an issue with, but that plays in the NFL. You go to an offense like the Raiders that they kind of just, it was Shadur Sanders at quarterback. If they have Ben Johnson as their, head coach or whatever, Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of a one cut and go runner as well. It's not like he can tempo runs at a super high level either. He's very fast. He knows it, and he runs at full speed most of the time. So that's just kind of the type of runner Amari Hampton is. He's a little bit more scheme dependent than some of the other backs in this class, who I think, like Quinshon Judkins, for example, I think would fit most schemes in the NFL, whereas Amari Hampton kind of needs good offensive line, big holes to run through, make people miss in space. You mentioned he has like all the best qualities of Zamir White. I mean, Zamir White never had 38 catches in one of his college football seasons.
No,
too, so.
I was more so making a joke. Like all the pro Zamir White people, when they would talk about why do you like him in fantasy going into 2024, everybody said the same thing: the size, the speed, the between the tackles ability, the ability to carry a big workload. It's like, well, you just described what Omarion Hampton actually is.
Yeah, my comp for him is like a Zach Charbonnet-y Travis Etienne kind of. Like he's like big and physical like Charbonnet, but he's kind of like a one cut and go runner like Etienne. So that's kind of who he reminded me of when I was watching him.
Well, you mentioned going into the year like a Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, somewhere on that plane. Again, I was more so Nick Chubb because I did think his behind the line of scrimmage ability to diagnose holes was higher. But at the same time, like that Jonathan Taylor archetype, I think is also a reasonable one that people might get to as well.
Yeah, that's the nuts. If he hits Jonathan Taylor, I like, so full disclosure, I went back and watched a Wisconsin highlight tape of Jonathan Taylor right after I watched Hampton because I'm like, okay, how off was this comparison? Because I watched the difference to me when I watched the two players is that Taylor was a pro style running back through and through, knew how to, he ran with pad level. He knew how to tempo his runs, always in phase, always, making those subtle moves to make people miss as opposed to like exacerbating all of his resources to make someone miss, which is kind of how Hampton does it right now. So I think it's more just like the foot quickness and the lateral agility is the difference between him and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. Not to mention, like you said, top 40 draft capital here. I have him like if he can put it all together, I think Nick Chubb is the ceiling here. Like that is how high I am on Omarion Hampton, and I don't throw that lightly, man. We're talking about legitimately as soon as he retires, a first ballot Hall of Famer with Nick Chubb. So
really, you think he's gonna be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he retires?
Exactly. I mean, that's why he's going at 37th overall. It's not like teams would draft him first overall if they guaranteed that, eh?
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so I took Hampton. You're back on the board here now with the 107 we're at right now.
Yeah, and you alluded to it, but I think this is the spot where we see Caleb Johnson going off the board. I actually just did finish my evaluation on him, so I'll go through some of my notes here. Again, some of the biggest strengths here, you got elite vision. I mean, I think he's got the best vision in the class outside of maybe Ashton Genty. His ability to diagnose backside cuts for a guy that realistically this was his only full year of a true workload. Astonishing. I did not think we would see such a refined, intelligent runner when I was watching Caleb Johnson. Because again, you look at the profile and you see, the size, the touchdowns, you think, okay, I'm just getting a physical force of nature that just runs between the tackles. Caleb Johnson's foot speed, Caleb Johnson's nimbleness to diagnose, like I said, backside cuts, working in a zone scheme there with Iowa. I mean, I was a big fan. Now, obviously, he does have improvements to make as a receiver. That was the main thing I noticed. And he's not a burner by any stretch. Like, he's probably going to be a 4 or 5 runner. Doesn't really have that second level burst you want to see. For example, I sent you a couple clips, and that was the first thing you noticed. Okay, like, where's this guy's burst? He's 10 yards past the line of scrimmage, and everybody's getting their catch-up lanes on him. Like, he's not really separating from the pack. That is the one thing you notice once he's in space. However, I mean, we've seen a guy like James Conner, for example, being able to operate as a true RB1 in the league, despite not having that, elite burner separation ability once he's in an open space. I think a James Conner style runner is what you're getting with Caleb Johnson. And if you plug a James Conner style runner behind that Minnesota Vikings run scheme and offensive line, James Conner might be threatening for the rushing crown. And that's exactly what I view with Caleb Johnson here.
Yeah, I think so. This is like a side tangent just for a second, but I'll bring this back to Caleb Johnson. When you have like field stretcher caliber wide receivers like Addison, like Jefferson, Hawkinson obviously can stretch the seam as a tight end. When you add in a physical element of a run game to that type of scheme, it really puts defenses in a bind because now you can't just like, okay, they're not going to run it on us. We'll just play cover 2 every single play. And, you're not getting deep on us. But like when you have a physical runner, he can make you pay for playing cover 2 against him. It's why we saw in 2023, Isaiah Pacheco have such a great season for the Chiefs is that he was able to just dice up cover 2 because they were scared of Mahomes beating him deep. And same goes for like why Derrick Henry's been so successful this year is that like Lamar Jackson puts you in such a bind that if you have a physical element to your run game like Derrick Henry, it's very difficult to defend. And I think that's what Caleb Johnson would bring to the Minnesota Vikings. So I think this is a really good fit for Caleb Johnson. I think he's definitely worthy of this. 24 seems a little bit high for me, but I think he's definitely worthy of a top 50 selection.
Yeah, so I have him as an 84.5, which is as a top 50 pick. He'd be in that discussion for RB1 last year. Again, it's kind of so with Jonathan Brooks, he had a more consistent profile because you had the receiving ability with him. Caleb Johnson, I think, is a better pure rusher, but obviously doesn't have that tether that the receiving ability got Jonathan Brooks points for in my grading scale, but they both ended up at relatively the same grade there in the 84 range. So Caleb Johnson, again, if you were to tell me 5 years from now, who has the second highest floor of the running backs in this class, I think it's Caleb Johnson personally. However, like you're going to, I mean, you're actually not going to be talking about him in this mock because he didn't actually go in the first 2 rounds, but your thoughts on Quinshon Judkins or my thoughts on Omarion Hampton, or as we'll talk about in a bit with Trevion Henderson, I think because of their movement ability, they might have higher ceilings than Caleb Johnson, but there's no doubt in my mind that Caleb Johnson is going to be a starting NFL running back with his feel for the position.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair point to make about Caleb Johnson. I don't see an NFL team seeing like an early down guy as with not elite speed being a first round pick. Like that to me,
he's a second rounder for me.
I think he's probably more likely to go in the second or the third round just as a result of that. I think Hampton and Judkins and some of these guys that have more like speed and, they have the size and they have a little bit more upside to them. I think that they have a chance to sneak into the first round, but probably not. So I'm on the board here with the 108, and I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka because I just think the landing spot to Pittsburgh just makes so much sense here. With Pittsburgh, you're looking for an offense that can consistently move the chains on, in the passing game. And right now it's like big play to George Pickens where he mosses 3 defenders or nothing as a pass catching offense. So with Egbuka, you get a consistent PPR kind of chain mover. My comp for him coming into the year, because he's been potentially draft eligible for like 2 years now, was Amari Cooper. I think he's a very smart route runner, knows how to find the soft spot in zones. I remember going into the season, he was like 90th plus percentile against single coverage, 90th plus percentile against zone coverage. He's the type of pro style wide receiver that I think any NFL offense can use, especially when you have a guy who's an X receiver, a true number one, as we saw from a target share standpoint this year with George Pickens. But as far as number one receivers around the NFL are concerned, I don't think he's like a Justin Jefferson or a CeeDee Lamb or somebody like that. It would really benefit him to have a number 2 receiver who's maybe just as good as him, but just in different ways. And I think Emeka Egbuka and George Pickens would be like hand in glove, perfect fits and perfect complements to each other.
Yeah, and you mentioned like an Amari Cooper. I had him comp to a guy like DJ Moore. The common one that people might throw around like, oh, dude, this is like a Monroe St. Brown 2.0. Like you're going to hear all just like thicker slot archetypes at about 5'11 and 6'1. Godwin, like those are the type of comps that you're going to hear for Egbuka. And I mean, rightfully so. He went to the big school. He had big production. He's going to go in the top 20. I mean, he's a crystal clean wide receiver pick. Like if you get him in the first round of your Superflex rookie drafts, you just know you're not going to miss. That's kind of what I describe him as.
Yeah, which is precisely why he belongs in this kind of like 106 to 110 or 110 range or whatever. Like that's kind of where you'd expect a guy like that to go. He's just a pretty solid, safe floor type of prospect. His profile looks very similar to Chris Olave's, who's precisely went in this range of his rookie draft as well.
100%. So I'll be back on the clock here. What, the 108, I believe?
109.
109. Correction, my bad. It'd be between a few guys. Obviously, we could go, is this the Travis Hunter spot? Again, the way it was kind of explained in the mock draft, if I go back to what Dane Brugler actually said here with Travis Hunter, Hunter would give New York an upgrade at corner, and he'd be a fun weapon for Daboll to mix into the offense. So based off that discussion, let's just say that's the narrative at the NFL draft. He goes to the Giants and they say he's full-time corner, but he could be a fun mix into the offense. At that point, where does he fall in this mock? I don't know because I'm not taking him here. I'm actually going to go with out of Ohio State, playing tonight as we're recording this, Trevion Henderson going 44th overall to the Dallas Cowboys. And I mean, this is a match made in heaven, obviously, for Trevion Henderson, explosive back. Now, I was kind of talking about the offensive fit when I went through Burden, where the Cowboys obviously have their CeeDee Lamb, but they don't have any other real like game-breaking options, or this is a 3rd and 7 and you got a guy that can take something to the house. And we've seen that with Trevion Henderson. We've seen that with Luther Burden in spades this past year. With Trevion Henderson, I mean, he is your prototype 3rd down back is how I describe him. Very, very good receiver out of the backfield. Like I said, can create those explosives, whether it's in the receiving game or whether it's as a pure runner. The guy that I actually had him comp to was J.K. Dobbins, because you would think, okay, he's got a smaller frame. Maybe he doesn't absorb contact. he's like J.K. Dobbins in that sense. Like when he can finish through contact, he has been an absolute dog this year. We have seen 4.56 yards after contact per attempt from TreVeyon Henderson. I mean, the metrics across the board, 91.4 PFF rushing grade, 24.81 missed tackles forced per attempt, 1.22 yards per route run. The metrics are clean. The tape was even better. I do think he's going to be a top 50 pick when it's all said and done. And you're putting him in an offense that could potentially be, like I said, top 5 to 10 in the league. I think it'd be a home run on both parties.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, Ohio State had the ability to not use Judkins or Henderson too much this year, because the tough thing about scouting these guys is that you don't get a 300 touch season from them their final draft eligible year. But at the same time, they're not coming off of a season where they had 300 or 400 touches in their draft eligible season. So whenever they get to the NFL, they're going to have fresh legs and that kind of thing. I do think Henderson is the type of guy that you only want to let carry the ball 200 times a season. You don't want to give this guy 320 carries on any given year. You probably want to throw him the ball 70 times and give him the ball 200 times on the ground and mix in a Rico Dowdle or whatever team he ends up going to. You mix in the secondary back there. So with Henderson, you're looking at a guy who has, like, a lot of people are going to comp him to DeAndre Swift, I think is going to be a popular comparison for him. And if you think about when DeAndre Swift was best in Philadelphia, the year that he played there, and also in Detroit, that was kind of, he had a running mate in his backfield. He had a Jamal Williams to carry the ball inside the red zone or whatever. I think Henderson's going to be used in a similar way. So I like Henderson, honestly, to go to the Cowboys. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you're going to be a pass-focused team with taking Burden, already having Lamb, having Dak Prescott. You give Henderson the opportunity to command 70, 80 targets. He's going to be really relevant for fantasy.
It's funny because, I mean, my comp for him too with J.K. Dobbins, I mean, we saw once he came to Baltimore, he was the efficient, explosive back paired with another big, cold weather back like a Gus Edwards. So kind of seen that actually in both spots that he's been in the NFL, with obviously both Baltimore and LA.
Yeah, for sure. And Dobbins, because of the injuries, never really developed as a receiver, but I do think Henderson has the upside for sure. I actually think it's probably his best trait. His speed and his receiving ability is probably his best trait. So it's actually going to be the way that he wins, probably more so than like grinding it out on the goal line or whatever. But he has the upside to turn into like a full status 3-down back. And if you think of the guys the last couple of years that we had a little bit of concern about whether or not they'd get a full workload, they ended up getting one. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, those type of guys.
He's that type of athlete too, by the way.
Like 10 out of 10. You do all the fantasy relevant stuff best. Like all the stuff that matters the most for fantasy, receiving upside, big plays, that kind of thing. If you do that stuff the best, you can learn the other stuff. You know what I mean? So that's why I think Henderson is one of the more interesting running backs in this class, because we've seen a full 4-season resume of him now, proving that he can be a great receiver, proving that he can break off the big play, proving that he can work between the tackles when he's asked to.
And it's funny because, again, he's going to be in contention for my RB3 in the glass. Spoiler alert for those of you that will actually be getting our draft guide. He's going to be up there in contention for RB3. But with TreVeyon Henderson, when he was coming out of his first year, like, people were legitimately making the claim, who's the better prospect, TreVeyon Henderson or Bijan Robinson? So the fact that at this point that putting him at potentially RB3 in this class as being really high on TreVeyon Henderson is kind of crazy, knowing where his hype was, where his status was coming off of that freshman year. Because I'd even make the claim that this year was better than that year. Now, of course, expectations wise, you'd expect the 4th-year player to be better than the 1st-year player, but it's finally starting to shed light to maybe he was just dealing with bad injuries in the 2 years in between.
Yeah, well, and I was starting to get nervous that he was just Tank Bigsby, where he had a great freshman season, has like 2 bad years in a row, but he finally, like you said, got back to like his full efficiency numbers. So feel pretty good about Henderson. I think that would be a great landing spot for him. I'm going to jump back into the first round.
Yep.
And take Tyler Warren here. Like you said, given the write-up on Travis Hunter, I would probably have taken him if I knew he was going to get the ball 50, 60% of the time on the offensive plays. But I can't take him over some of these like high-end prospects, especially with Tyler Warren, who right from jump is probably going to be a top 5 dynasty tight end, if not even potentially higher than that.
Yeah.
Based on this draft capital. The Indianapolis Colts have weapons, of course. They got Downs, they got Pittman, they got a couple other ancillary receivers with Mitchell and with Pierce there. But Warren is a different cat, man. He's been commanding targets all season long. He's been Drew Aller's go-to guy. He's going to test well. He's going to have high draft capital. If he goes 14th overall to the Indianapolis Colts, he's going to be heavily involved in their offensive game plan. I'm not going to call him Brock Bowers from like what he could do his rookie season, because I really don't think we're going to see that again for a long, long time from a rookie tight end. But when I look at what Tyler Warren can do, you don't make the college football playoff as a 6'6", 260-pound tight end and command 104 receptions in college football. It just doesn't happen for tight ends in college football. 1,230 yards, 8 touchdowns, a 93 PFF receiving grade. Those are wickedly good numbers for a tight end. He's almost like super Dalton Kincaid. Like what everybody likes about Dalton Kincaid, the prospect, the way he moves, that great breakout season his final year. He's like a much better prospect version of what Dalton Kincaid represented, who was drafted in the first round as well, and obviously has had his moments with Buffalo, but hasn't really turned the corner yet. I think Warren will hit the ground running with Indianapolis based on what we've seen from him so far.
Yeah, so again, like full disclosure, we haven't done our full all 22 on him yet, but I mean the main comp that I've actually seen for him has been like a Greg Olsen type, and we've seen Greg Olsen in certain spots, obviously in Carolina, especially at the end of his Chicago tenure, produce some big time seasons. Now, I will say the current NFL is more adapted to having versatile tight ends like Tyler Warren be focal points in the passing game versus what they were back then. So maybe if you go and search up Greg Olsen's box scores from back then, you might think, oh, this is what I want more than this if I'm drafting Tyler Warren. But you're getting the size, 6'6", you're getting this, 6'6", 260 pounds. You're getting the speed, a guy that's probably going to run in the 4.5, 4.6 range, which is very strong at the tight end position. And you're getting a guy that can operate in space as a yak player. So specifically in this spot for Indianapolis, I think he's got the opportunity to, is it crazy to say, even be their number one pass catcher for the future?
No, it's definitely not crazy to say that. I mean, I'm a notorious Josh Downs apologist, and I love Josh Downs, but I think he fits this offense really well. Now they just need a quarterback because they don't currently have one. But in rookie drafts, what do we always say? You draft the player, you don't draft the landing spot. Like landing spots change very, very quickly, especially for the tight end position, man. Like was anybody excited about the Raiders landing spot? No, we all wanted him to go to the Rams or the Jets or one of these teams that we thought was going to be a better landing spot for Brock Bowers, but it didn't matter because Brock Bowers was simply that dude. He was simply that good. And Tyler Warren, again, I'm not saying he's going to be Brock Bowers, but he could definitely just make us all look stupid for passing on him if we let him fall to 203 in the rookie draft because we don't like the Colts landing spot.
Well, I actually do love the Colts landing spot, especially assuming they keep their coaching staff for the foreseeable future, because we've seen Shane Steichen, with the movement that they have on offense, really open up opportunities for the yak game. And obviously Tyler Warren, his biggest strength is both his compete at the catch point as well as his yak game. So big fan of the Tyler Warren pick. That would be what, the 110. So now it's back to me 111. Yep. And again, it would be between Travis Hunter and the final first round player. I think because you got Warren, we'll just group the tight ends together here because, again, I don't know what to make of the Travis Hunter usage. I will give my flowers, though, to Colson Loveland because I also think he got the nuts landing spot here, landing back with Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers. It's pretty simple. People are going to look at the 2024 Colson Loveland production. They're going to see 56 catches, 582 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. On surface level, you're like, well, that's not a lot of production. Like, he didn't really do much this year. But when you contextualize what he was to this Michigan offense, keep this in mind. He missed the Ohio State and the bowl games. In the 11 regular season Big Ten games that are recorded here, right? The Michigan passing offense passed for, 13 correction. They played 13 total games. Loveland only played in 10 of them. Michigan's entire passing offense this year threw for less than 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Colson Loveland in 10 games, literally missing 3 of those games, 582 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. The next closest receiver on the team was Tyler Morris, who had 248 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns as a wide receiver. So when you contextualize what Loveland was to this offense, again, you look at the numbers, you think, less than 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, that's not really much. Dog, Michigan's passing offense was ranked 123rd out of 128 qualified teams. And we saw last year when they could actually throw the ball, Colson Loveland's production was up there. So I think people might get on Colson Loveland because he doesn't have the receiving profile in terms of the production that Tyler Warren does. But I think he's a rock solid first round tight end. And you mentioned the Dalton Kincaid archetype. I think Loveland's just a better version of what Kincaid was coming out.
Yeah, I will say the one thing about Loveland that makes me a little bit nervous is like 6 of Michigan's 13 picks, and like you said, he only played in 10 games, were like targeted at Loveland. And he only had a 20% contested catch rate this season. He only was a 78.4 QBR when targeted. Like there's more to be concerned about, I think, with taking Loveland, to the point that I would rather get him in the second round. But again, he got first round draft capital going back to Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. They need receiving weapons outside of Ladd McConkey. So it makes a lot of sense. And the profile, this is why we market share adjust our statistics, obviously, is because 585 receiving yards at a 1675 or whatever they had this year is very, very good production relative to the offense. Because if you farm that out, if they threw 4,000 yards, you're talking about a 1,500 yard receiver or whatever. So, I feel good about Loveland. I just probably wouldn't have drafted him over some of the guys that are still on the board here.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. There's a couple strong names, like some of the wide receivers in the second round. Maybe if you are a Jalen Milroe guy, you can go that direction at 34th overall. And of course, I mean, there's the biggest elephant in the room. That is the number 1 overall talent still being available at this point. So I'm curious what direction you go.
He's going to be the guy that I select, because I cannot live with myself for not letting Travis Hunter go in the first round, because he's just simply that good. And again, based on what we list in the mock draft as he's going to get sprinkled in basically as a fun weapon on offense, maybe he shouldn't go this high. But you know what? I just think Travis Hunter's that good. And Travis Hunter needs to go this high, because Travis Hunter should go this high. If he came out and said he's not going to, so let's put this dream to bed. If he came out and said, I'm going to play wide receiver in the NFL, I'm not going to play defense, or I'll play packages on defense, but I'm going to primarily play wide receiver, he'd be the 103 or the 104 in this class. Like, he's simply
potentially 101.
Yeah, potentially 101. Like, he's honestly, like, there's plenty of respected analysts that I trust their opinion who think he's a better receiver than Ted McMillan.
Yeah. No, I've seen that too. It's crazy because you'll talk to certain people and be like, well, he's a better cornerback than Will Johnson, but he's also a better receiver than Ted McMillan. So, like, he'd be the number 1 at 2 different positions in this class, which kind of just speak volumes to the level of athletic talent that you're dealing with here. Now, obviously, if you guys have watched Travis Hunter play, you'll know exactly what we mean. The guy, it almost feels like he's God's gift to football. Like, I don't think I've seen a skill player be this type of generational in how long?
Yeah, he like, the definition of like instincts and like football IQ and like
he knows how to play ball,
all these things that like matter to a corner and matter to a wide receiver. He just, like, NCAA football turned it up to 99. Like, he just he knows exactly where the ball is supposed to be. It's because he plays both sides of the ball, probably, that he knows exactly where the receiver is going to be when he breaks on a football. He knows exactly how to, attack the ball in the air because he plays receiver when he's a corner. Like, that's why he has so many interceptions. His ball skills are insane, man. He's a corner in this class, technically, by, classification, who has better ball skills than any receiver in this class.
Yeah, no, it's actually remarkable when you watch him, because, like, on one hand, you'll watch him and be like, oh, well, this is just Pat Surtain, Sauce Gardner at corner. And then you'll watch him play wide receiver and be like, oh, no, this guy could also just be like a top 5 to 8 receiver in the league. Like, the guy is unreal.
I got the comp. Ready for the comp? Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson run into each other at full speed.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good one.
That's what he is. That's literally what he is. If you had, like, Travis Hunter, this is a side note, obviously. If you play in IDP leagues, like, you need like 8 first-round picks to trade this guy off my team. Like, honestly, like, if you play IDP scoring and it's going to be scored the way that it would benefit Travis Hunter to play both sides of the ball in the NFL, he's an absolute cheat code. Like, he's literally going to be the best player in the history of IDP.
Yeah, he'd just be the 101 in startups at that point.
He probably would be. Like, would he not?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, if you guys play IDP, you'll have more context on that. Full disclosure, I've played in 0 IDP leagues in my life, so I don't actually know. But if it's actually calibrated, like, oh yeah, the guys in my IDP slot can also get me receiving production. Yeah, I mean, the guy's not only the 101 in the rookie draft, but the 101 in startups.
They'd have to invent a new kind of 3rd-round reversal just for the person that has Travis Hunter on their team.
Bro's Shohei Ohtani of football at this point.
Yeah, literally. He's literally the Shohei Ohtani of football. Yeah. But anyways, we had to get him in the first round because even if he's only going to play 50% of his snaps on offense, honestly, I think he's that good. I think he could still be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy at that level of playing time. And him and Malik Neighbors on the same field, that's a whole lot of fucking raw ability, man, that Brian Daboll and his staff are going to have a fun time coaching up. And speaking of Brian Daboll, I think it's worth noting that Jalen Milroe probably finds his way just outside of this range. You get 34th overall draft capital for a team that really needs quarterback production. I don't know what they would do in the meantime at quarterback if they were picking Jalen Milroe 34th overall. Maybe they sign Kirk Cousins or Jameis Winston or something as like a bridge quarterback. But either way, Jalen Milroe runs. He's going to be valuable for fantasy if he has opportunities to start games. So Jalen Milroe, my comp for him, if I had to give one right now, because I haven't like fully scouted him yet, he's like, and this is maybe a bad thing, he's even more raw than even like Richardson and Justin Fields.
Absolutely. Well, those guys,
but it's all mental, right? Like, so here's the bright side.
He also can't hit the broadside of a barn.
He can't. Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson, let's say, haven't worked out in the NFL so far. Jalen Milroe could be just like them. He could be, we look at him, he's like, this isn't an NFL passer. He's going to be fantasy relevant when he's on the field because he runs the football, but he's not going to hold down a starting job very long. However, if he's got it upstairs and he works at it every offseason, he's got a good coaching staff teaching him, I believe there's a path and a possibility that Jalen Milroe could turn into a franchise quarterback. It just would take a lot of effort, a lot of work, and probably a couple of years of coaching.
I thought you were gonna say a direct comp because I know who you were thinking of.
Jalen Hurts.
And I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, if he can get the best offensive line in the NFL, if he can get 2 number 1 wide receivers, the best running back in the league, maybe he's got a chance to turn into Jalen Hurts. But it's very optimistic because I will say me having the 2 live viewings that I did of him, both games against Michigan last year in the fucking semifinal and this year in the bowl game, the guy can't throw the football anywhere accurately. Like,
I thought the same thing about Hurts, though. I thought the same thing about Hurts when he was in college at Alabama, or sometimes before his Oklahoma year, he was a lot better. But like at Alabama, Jalen Hurts, was I thinking this was going to be a franchise quarterback, $50 million or $40 million a year quarterback one day? Absolutely not. So to me, if Milroe's got what it takes above the shoulders, he could get there. And I do think he's going to be an interesting, piece in rookie drafts this year, whether he goes late first round, mid first round, early second round, wherever his draft capital ends up being, he's going to be somebody that makes or breaks the rookie cycle in 2025, especially because we're kind of starving for the quarterback position in this class. And a couple other guys that we just missed the cut, obviously, Harold Fannin Jr., tight end from Bowling Green, goes to Miami at 48th overall, kind of playing that Jonnu role would be interesting. A couple other receivers. You got Texas Hook'em Horns, Matthew Golden going 40th overall to the Saints. Don't love to see that as a Saints hater. Trey Harris going to the Texans at 58. He would have probably been my next pick if I had to make one.
Elika Manor as well.
Elika Manor going to the Commanders. I mean, we know how good Jaden Daniels is now. And you give him basically the number 2 receiver role behind Terry McLaurin there. He would definitely be interesting. Jaden Higgins goes to the Chiefs. Mason Taylor goes to the Broncos at 51. And then that was pretty much the end of the mock. So we went through a full first-round mock draft here, Superflex rookie mock based on the landing spots of Dane Brugler's 2-round NFL mock draft. The full mock is listed down below in the description. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, the back and forth kind of commentary that we went through here. As we kind of talked about throughout this video, head on over to flockfantasy.com. There's tons of stuff going on over there right now. Our Dynasty rankings, fully up to date. We're going to have our Dynasty rookie draft guide coming early to mid-February. Definitely stay tuned for that. If you want to sign up for an annual subscription right now, you get a free team review from either of us. And very, very soon, you will also get our buy, sell, hold report. We're just working out some back-end things, and you guys can submit your team. We can give you 5 buys, 5 sells, 5 holds based on exactly who's in your league, who has that player, what your team needs, all that good stuff. So if you're interested in anything that we got going on personalized content-wise, flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE is how you can get started over there. That'll be linked down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.